Hello and welcome back to Red Brick Recap. This is episode 7. That's the Central Michigan week, the Central Michigan preview week, and the OU recap week. I'm joined again by my co-host Ted. Ted, how are we doing? It's another gorgeous day in Oxford.
Yeah, we're doing all right. Can't complain.
Good to hear. All right, well, let's jump right in because we got a lot to talk about this week. Obviously, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about one of the biggest news stories out of Miami this week. We'll start right here with congrats to Chuck Martin. We talked about last week. This was his chance to get to tie Randy Walker with 59 wins. He did just that with the 30-20 win over OU. He's now tied for the lead at 59 wins. I got to see him briefly in the press conference afterward, and he was super excited about it. He said he spoke to Randy Walker's wife, who congratulated him on the record, and that's just a super cool moment for him. Really happy for him. He's really changed the trajectory of the Miami program, so it's cool to see him get his moment like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, who would have thought that in 2014 when he came and took this job that he'd be almost right there for holding the record for most coaching wins, by himself. He's tied with Randy Walker, as we've mentioned, but one more and he's got the record by himself, 60 wins, and who knows how much more he can get.
Yeah, I mean, he's really grown into a legend here at Miami. I mean, he's probably one of the biggest, I guess, celebrity figures we have in Oxford, if you can call him a celebrity. But he's grown into a staple of that program, and he's built a culture here that I really think has changed the way people think about Miami football, which is really cool to see. And it's been fun to watch the last couple of years to see how this program has evolved.
Yeah, Miami is a team now that people consider a good group of five school. They don't just say, "Oh, Miami, let's schedule them on our schedule to get a free, easy win." It's, "Hey, Miami's going to be a tough one. So if we want to play them, we got to be prepared because they may upset us or they may bring a hard fought game." So the culture around Miami definitely has changed since Chuck Martin has gotten here, and he has his fingers all over the program, as we know. Like, he built this from the ground up. There was no inheriting a good team and then continuing to be a good team. He started, what was it? He was 2-10 when he first came here, something like that. 2-8.
I think he was 2-10, and then he was 3-9 the next year, I believe.
Exactly. This wasn't a easy program turnaround. This was a well-built, methodical turnaround.
Absolutely. Well, we'll talk more about Coach Martin and some of his signature wins later on in the show. Next up that we want to talk about, though, is we're coming up on midweek action. We're getting to that time of the year where we're starting to get into some midweek games. I don't know about you. I love them. I think midweek action is what makes the MAC so unique and makes it really special to kind of have those. I don't want to say like unique games because like they are it's still college football at its core, but it is different having like a Wednesday night feel to a game. And I over the years, I've been to a couple of them and I've always really enjoyed them. I've thought they've been a ton of fun. So I'm excited to bring it back. We're in preliminary talks about possibly doing a pregame show, whether that's in the same kind of format we're doing right now where we're at home, or we're exploring the idea of possibly doing it on site at Jaeger. But that logistically might prove to be a challenge. So we'll see. But throwing that out there, keep an eye on that in the coming weeks. Once midweek action starts rolling, we might be doing some different type of content. So keep your eyes peeled for that.
Yeah, midweek action is always one of the more unique aspects of college football. Obviously, the MAC has that deal with ESPN, and that's why I think it's gotten so popular over the last couple of years, is that people now get to watch action. It's not just the people who go to the schools. It's now kind of a nationwide type of deal. I mean, my cousin who goes to school at Georgia, he always looks forward to action just because it's the only college football game that's on Tuesday or Wednesday nights. And I know they have expanded it recently. Like Liberty and Kennesaw State just played the other day. So I know Conference USA is getting into more midweek games, kind of encroaching on the MAC's territory, but the MAC started it first.
Yeah, the Tuesday and Wednesday are the days for the MAC. The NFL has Sundays, college football has Saturdays. Tuesday and Wednesdays for the action, and that's how it should be. I believe that's Kent State and Ball State are the two games that we have that are midweek games. I think the Kent State one is the one at home. I'll double check the schedule and we'll get back to that. But just teasing out that idea that we want to do some pregame stuff. We want to start doing some live stuff. So that's coming down the road. Let's jump right into the OU recap. Obviously, super fun game. I mean, Jaeger, it was not the UC crowd. I'll say that. It was not as big as the UC crowd was, but 17,000 fans for Oxford, Ohio is a really, really solid crowd at that game. And it was loud. It was energetic. Outside of the UC game, I think that's probably the loudest I've seen Jaeger in recent years, which was really, really fun to watch. I put out a tweet a couple hours before the game. It took me, I live half a mile from Jaeger. It took me an hour to get my car down to the stadium. It took me an hour because of how many people were in town for it, which is obviously really annoying, but also super cool to kind of see that we are building up this football culture.
Yeah, just to clarify on the schedule, Ball State, November 5th, that's a Tuesday night, so that's at Ball State. We have a Wednesday night game against Kent State. That's November 13th. And then another Tuesday night game versus Northern Illinois on November 19th. And then the last game is Bowling Green on a Friday night, which of all nights, Friday night at Bowling Green. But anyways, like you were saying, it definitely helped that it was family weekend. Obviously, parents are going to come in and they're going to say, oh, what do we want to do with little Timmy, right? Like, it's let's go to the football game. That's what you do at college. But being there, I don't want to say I was a victim of family weekend, but my girlfriend's parents bought tickets for everyone, so I ended up going, and I wasn't in the student section, which was a little thin looking from the parents' side. But obviously the parent section was filled to the brim, really. And like you said, it was loud. It was a raucous environment. It was what Jaeger Stadium should be every weekend.
Absolutely. I also think that like the student section was maybe less full because some of the students that would have been on that side sitting on the family side. So
exactly. I mean, that's what happened with me.
You're right. I do think it was. I wish that the pregame stuff that we did for the UC game, where like they had the area set up specifically for students to come and essentially tailgate next to the stadium. I wish that we would do that for every home game. I don't know why we don't do that for every home game. It seems like a no-brainer. I know they did it for a couple games last year and it was a big success. So if anyone at Miami's listening to this, bring that back. That was really cool and really fun. It's a fun environment for students. I don't know why we still don't do it, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, I think that the atmosphere was great, and I think that really helped the team get into the game. I wrote it down on my notes, but like we should do that more often. That was a really fun home win, and it never really felt like Miami was out of control. It felt like they had the control of the game and had the flow of the game for all 60 minutes, which was a nice change of pace considering some of the other games earlier this season.
Yeah, it extends. It becomes a 2-game win streak. Miami they were up 16-0 in going into halftime, which is completely dominant. And then by the end of the third, they were up 30-6. And the score is not reflective of how well Miami played because they only won by 10, but it's some of those late charges where the last touchdown was scored with 6 seconds left, things like that.
Right.
But Miami was completely dominant this game. It was another one of those games where we saw it wasn't, we're not talking about we saw the potential. It was there, and they just from top to bottom, they looked like the best football team in the MAC. And again, I know we may be a little biased because we're Miami reporters, but this was a team that stomped on a 4-1 Eastern Michigan team and then followed that up with a great win against a 2-0 in MAC play Ohio Bobcats team. And we were just talking about it last week. Is the last 2 times Miami has beaten Ohio, they've gone on to win the MAC championship. And we said it last week. I'll say it again this week. But on a season that we almost kind of wrote off, there's still a chance.
Yeah. Also, it's OU. It's the fact that we beat up on our rival at home. Never not going to be awesome. That's always fun. I think it's the first time that we've beaten OU at home since we've been here, at least. Maybe freshman year, but no one went to games, obviously, because of COVID. So it's the first time that I've been able to see a Miami win over OU at Jaeger, which was awesome for me. Always love a rivalry win. I got to throw it into some of my OU friends' faces, saying my school's better. That's always going to rock. So shout out to the team for pulling that off. Also, huge shout out. We've been talking. I feel like we talk about him every week, and especially for the first 4 weeks, we were very negative about him. But Brett Gabbert's back. You said it last week. I hope the TikTok slideshow popped up again for you. But Brett Gabbert is back, and he showed that he is a veteran leader on this team who can make an impact at every level of the offensive game, and he showed it. 14 for 21 with 3 touchdowns. He looks poised. He looks confident. And they talked about it in the post-game press conference. The throw to Javon Tracy was big league. That's impressive. Like, there's very few quarterbacks in the world who make that throw, and probably even fewer receivers who make that catch. So really impressive. The offense looked like a machine, and that starts with the QB. So I know we've talked a lot about Brett in the past couple of weeks, but this is what we wanted. This is what we expect out of him after being here for 4 years or 6 years.
That throw by Brett, I remember sitting and watching it and almost letting out an audible like, no, because Reggie Virgil is standing right there, and Brett essentially threw it into double coverage, first of all, but it was essentially a soft triple coverage because you had the defender who was like playing a soft zone on Reggie Virgil, and I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, like here's his interception, and you just placed it perfectly. And as you said, that is big league throw. That is what the scouts have seen on him to make them take a second look at him. And
Right.
that's a throw that maybe in those first 4 weeks that he tried because he knows he can do it, but maybe the confidence was off or the rust was still there. And that's probably why his interception rate was a little higher. But now that he's got his confidence back and the rust has been shaken off, he's back to making those throws. I mean, I can't even begin to explain just how like incredible that throw was.
Yeah. I mean, this is a completely different team when QB1's rolling. The offense looks like a completely different unit. And also, shout out to the receivers. I can't pinpoint one point in the game off of memory. I'd have to go back and like actually do like a film look, but I can't pinpoint any like egregious drops. I feel like every catchable ball that there was brought down and was made a play. So shout out the receivers. Cade McDonald, a big game. We talked about him earlier on the season becoming like Brett's top target. Kind of took a step back in the last couple of weeks, but this week he really put on a good performance. 5 catches for 84 yards, and the touchdown was filthy. I mean, I think he caught the ball around the 10, made like 2 or 3 guys miss before reaching the end zone. That was a really nice play, and I think it's been missing for Cade at some points this season. I think he's been kind of absent at times. So it was really good to see him get into the game. We talked about Javon Tracy. We talked about Reggie Virgil already. Those 2 guys also had a touchdown. That's what you want out of your receivers, obviously. Spreading the love. No one really took over. But when you have 3 guys who can all catch passes and are all reliable targets, it makes Brett's job so much easier.
Yeah, the Cade McDonald route, it was a simple hook route, and Brett threw it to his outside shoulder. He caught it on the outside shoulder, and he already had his momentum to spin around to that outside. And as you said, he made made 2 men miss. I think there was a high tackle that he slipped out of, and then a little juke move into the end zone. And at that point, the crowd was already hyped, but they were just going nuts because again, he caught it probably, as you said, 10, 15 yards outside of the end zone. And there were 2 guys right in front of him. There's no way that he should be making it into the end zone, but he did, and it was filthy, as you said. And the thing about Cade McDonald, we have talked about him, and we were expecting him to be the number 1 wide receiver. But I think that's the beauty of this offense, is that there is no number 1 wide receiver because they're all number 1 wide receivers, right? If you look at the 3 guys you just mentioned, Cade McDonald, Reggie Virgil, and Javon Tracy, those are all guys you trust in the toughest moments. Those are the guys you trust to go get you a deep ball or a jump ball. Those are your number 1 wide receivers. If you put Reggie Virgil, Javon Tracy, Cade McDonald on any other team in the MAC, they're number 1 wide receivers. So I think that's the beauty of this offense, is that Brett doesn't have to rely on just 1 wide receiver, and that spreads the offense, and more importantly, the defense spreads out the defense a lot more, because now it's like Now it's like, okay, you got to cover every guy in the field. You can't just double team McDonald, because if you double team McDonald, then you're leaving Reggie Virgil on an island by himself, or you're leaving Javon Tracy across the middle by himself. So while we haven't seen a number one type season from Cade McDonald, I think that's working to the advantage for the Redhawks.
Yeah, and I also want to shout out Cam Perry. This was the first time I've seen him play in person. I honestly thought when he transferred in that he'd have a much bigger impact. Maybe it's just depth chart thing, just seniority. I'm not making those decisions. I'm not in the room when those decisions are made. But I mean, you transfer in from a Big Ten school to come to the MAC, you're expecting to get some cashes. But he's got 5 on the season. If he continues to be a factor in this offense, that's 4 legitimate weapons, not to mention Kevin Davis out of the passing game, Mosey in the passing game. We haven't even talked about Cold Iron or Preston Daniel at all, really, this season. Those 2 tight ends are also a factor in the passing game. That is a lot of weapons for Brett to utilize on the offensive side of the ball, and that's a lot for a defense to worry about. So if you keep getting these guys involved and keep making defenses like second guess, like who do I cover, who do I focus on, that makes the offensive job so much easier to just find the open guy, find whoever they're not covering. I mean, obviously it sounds easier said than done, like no duh, just throw it to the open man. But really it does make the defense like question themselves and really think about who they cover.
Exactly. There was a wide receiver last year. I'm forgetting his name. He also transferred in, or maybe it was 2 years ago. Miles Marshall. That's who it was. He transferred in from Indiana, and people kind of expected him to have a bigger impact. And I think that's what people are seeing with Cam Perry, where it's kind of the same story again. But the thing about Perry is that he's only a redshirt sophomore. He's still got at minimum 2 more years. And McDonald's gone after this year. Tracy, does he have 1 or 2 more years?
He's a sophomore.
So, okay. So then Tracy stays around and Virgil stays around. But now all of a sudden, Perry gets thrust up on the depth chart next year. So it's like you were saying, there's a lot of talent at this position. Miami's always been pretty good with wide receivers. They've always had that talent. So I think right now it may be a little tough for Perry to get some reps, but when he's been on the field and when he's been targeted, he's made the most of his opportunities. I want to say, I know he had a big catch, right? It was
a 20-yarder. It was a big play.
I mean, so he's making the most of his opportunities. So I think next year he fits in seamlessly.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about another player that's made a difference on offense, and that's Keon Mosey. We've talked about it for weeks. Miami needed to establish a run game. They didn't in the early part of the season. I think that was kind of what led to some of the turnover issues we talked about, where maybe we're throwing passes we wouldn't throw otherwise because the run game just wasn't working. Keon Mosey's a dog. Well, I'll put that on the record. He's a beast. I mean, 112 yards on the ground. I mean, a lot of that's a little inflated with the 58-yard TD score, but 100 yards, that's the second straight game with 100 yards on the ground. That's what you want on your running back. I mean, he talked about it in the pregame. If you have a 100-yard quarterback, 100-yard, or Chuck Martin talked about a postgame. If you have a 100-yard passer, 100-yard rusher, 100-yard receiver, good things happen. So it was really cool. Really cool to see him get that. Really good to see him step up his performance this week.
Sounds like Chuck Martin's been listening to our podcast. I've been saying that for the past couple of weeks. But yeah, Keon Mosey, he is a transfer from Kansas State. He was over there his freshman year and saw a little bit of time and came to Miami. And he's always kind of been, I don't want to say looked past, but there's always been someone else that he's had to share the backfield with, whether it was Kenny Tracy or Kevin Davis or Rashad Amos or whoever else. He's always had to share the backfield with someone else. And this year, after Tracy goes down, now it's okay. Now there's a void, and it's who's going to step up, who's going to be the big dog, and it's been Mosey, as we've said. Keon Mosey has thrust himself into the conversation. Not thrust himself into the conversation. He has been the conversation. He is the guy now, and it's something you love to see, especially going into MAC play when we weren't sure who was going to be that running back, and now that we have a trusty running back, it makes the offense flow so much better. And Keon Mosey, I cannot say enough good things about his development.
Yeah. And also talking about Mosey, I mean, the offensive line's key to that. They were huge this week. They played as close to a perfect game as you can hope for out of your O-line. Didn't allow a sack. I think there was only one QB hit on Gabbert. We've talked about it all season that QB1's taking a lot of shots. The quarterback's getting hit, and we know what Brett's injury history is like. So you have to limit those hits. And this week they did. No sacks, only one hit. That's a recipe for success. You keep the pocket clean and let your quarterback go to work. And Brett showed what happens if you give him a clean pocket. I mean, another just great week from the O-line. 100 yards on the ground, no sacks. That's about as good as you can hope for from an offensive line perspective.
Yeah, you mentioned it. Brett has taken a lot of hits over his career, and each one continues to add up for him. So being able to keep him upright when obviously he's most effective is huge. And I think this was a real confidence booster for the O-line that has had some struggles early in the season, but have been much improved going forward. But now that they can say, "Hey, we did not allow a sack to a very good Ohio defense." Ohio is always a very formidable defense, but the fact that they didn't allow a sack is huge. And for someone like Brett, who is no longer as mobile as he used to be, not necessarily like an improvising quarterback as much as he used to be, keeping him in the pocket and keeping him upright is huge for Gabbert. And we're going to continue to see the Gabbert that we've seen these past 2 weeks if that pocket can stay clean.
Yeah, and no penalties either. I think there was only one penalty on the Redhawks in the entire game. That was shocking to me because especially in previous weeks, like the UMass game, I think back to Notre Dame, I felt like there was a flag flying on every single play.
Oh my gosh!
So to have that game and to have this performance where you're not taking penalties, you're not making these little mistakes, that tells me that this team is starting to really put it together and really start to flow, and that's a huge confidence builder. And as a fan perspective and as a media perspective, going into next week, like if you can play this clean game, if you're not taking penalties, if you're not screwing up your field position by taking stupid penalties, it changes your entire offensive perspective. So clean game from the whole team, really good team win, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Anytime you can put up 30 points against your rival, it should be celebrated. So shout out the offense for another good week.
Shout out the offense.
And let's talk about the other side of the ball. Excuse me. Let's talk about the other side of the ball now. Defense. I wrote it down. Where was this all season? This was a dominant performance. When you hold your excuse me, oh my gosh. When you hold your rival to 6 points for the first 3 quarters and you're really only giving up 2 real late kind of garbage time touchdowns, that's a perfect performance in my perspective. That's all you can ask for as a coach is just saying, let's not let them get anything going. They knocked their quarterback out of the game. They knocked Parker Navarro. We talked about how he could be one of the biggest threats to Miami's success this weekend. They forced him to the bench. That's how much they dominated. They shut his game down completely.
Yeah, we said the recipe for success for the Miami defense was to eliminate Parker Navarro's effectiveness, and he didn't look good. They kept him contained in the running lanes, and they didn't let him get super far, and the option play didn't really work all that much as it had the previous week for Ohio. And when Navarro was forced to throw, he didn't look comfortable. The pocket wasn't clean. He was making some mistakes, missing some passes. He ended up getting intercepted at least twice. Salopek and Strader both got picks, and that was what sealed the win for Miami. It was how good their defense played. And the fact that their defense was able to produce opportunities for their offense is something that we expected to see for the whole season. We expected this defense to be the anchor and to help the offense kick it into gear sometimes. And that's exactly what happened in this game is the defense was getting timely stops. The offense was converting on those timely stops and converting on the good field position. And it was an absolute who let Chuck Martin cook? Because he cooked up an absolute splendid dish.
Yeah, I mean, from the team perspective, three turnovers, 3 sacks, 4 TFLs. That's dominant. And, I mean, we'll talk about it here, but the stars of the show were fully on display. I feel like we haven't talked about him a whole lot this year, but Ty Wise looks back to prime form. I mean, he had a TFL, a sack, he had 8 tackles, especially when he was playing opposite Brian Ugu. It looks like he was a massive threat coming off of that edge and getting to the quarterback and kind of forcing OU to kind of scramble a little bit and improvise on some plays where maybe they didn't want to.
Yeah, I think part of the part of the, I don't want to say ineffectiveness, but part of the reason why I don't think we've seen as much as we're used to from Ty Wise is because they were still trying to figure out where to put him realistically. I mentioned this last week. I want to see the splits between linebacking and playing that kind of like LDE, like that, that far left defensive end. But now that I think they figured it out, they know where to play him. Just play him opposite of Ugu, whether Ugu is on the line or whether he's dropped back a little bit. But just play him opposite of Ugu because the line is going to have to pick who are they going to, who are they going to throw two players at, and who are they going to put one player at? Because realistically, even if it's just a three, even if it's just a 3-down lineman where it's Ugu, Washington, and Wise, one of them is going to be single covered or single blocked, and whoever it is going to make whoever is guarding them pay. And I think we saw it this week. I gave my flowers to Nasir Washington last week, and he got doubled this week. He was doubled almost every play. And guess what happened? Ty Wise sack, Ugu sack. There was just so much pressure generated on Navarro that Ohio couldn't get anything going offensively, and they couldn't get into any rhythm because as soon as they dropped back, all of a sudden it's Wise in the backfield, Solitech in the backfield, Ugu in the backfield, Washington, whoever it is. Miami could have put out their fourth stringers the way they were playing. Like it was just an overall defensive dominance.
Yeah. Remember when you were like growing up and like you play Madden and your buddy who was kind of being a jerk would just spam pass rush moves on the O-line and take a sack or get you to sack every single play, and it would really drive you wild. That's how I imagine it is facing this Miami D-line right now. That's how I imagine it is when you see Salopek, when you see Ugu, and you see Ty Wise on the other end. I feel like you're just – one of them's going to get home. One of them's going to get to the quarterback. One of them's going to get to your RB. And I'm not really sure how you scheme around him.
No, if we could scheme around them, I think any MAC team would try to hire us on spot because the way that Miami's defense is playing, it's impossible. And I think it's going to stink next year when some of these guys go to graduation, but obviously we're going to cherish it while we have it. But you're right. I mean, if it's a 3-3, if they're playing a 3-4 or a 4-3, because again, they don't play a lot of 3-3-5, but if they have 3 linebackers, 4 down linemen, like that's now 7 guys, all of whom are more than capable of sprinting through the line and getting to the quarterback or getting to the running back for TFL or sacks. So this is going to sound cocky, but I don't know if you really can scheme for it.
Yeah.
Unless it's, hey, you know what? You got to get the ball out quick, like run a quick hitch, a quick slant, do something, but get the ball out quick because if you try to hold on to it for more than a couple of seconds, you're going to get sacked. And we mentioned that with Parker Navarro. You said his drop back time, he holds the ball for 2 to 3 seconds at a time. And as we saw, that was not a recipe for success. Miami's defense just got home really quickly.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the only way you can really do it is you try and get these guys one-on-one and then make a man miss. Because if one of them, if you try and go through their front 7, if one person makes contact, the other 7 are going to make contact. It's like a swarm. So
Yeah.
getting out in space might be the only way to attack that and try and making a guy miss a one-on-one. Another guy we haven't really talked about, who I keep bringing up because he's one of my favorite players to watch this season, is Corbin Hondrew. Another week, I think he had like 7 tackles. He's playing like a man possessed. It felt like when I was watching from upstairs, he felt like he was everywhere. It seemed like every play he was either making a tackle or joining a tackle or making some kind of impact on the defensive side of the ball. And that's just another defensive playmaker that Miami has now, outside of the 3-4 guys we've already talked about, and kind of more in that like linebacker role. He plays more of an impact in like the short passing game as well. So having these weapons at every level of the ball makes it really hard to face this Miami defense right now.
Yeah, Corbin Hondrew was a guy who I remember getting sparse playing time through the years, and he didn't have a big impact, if any, or even like a negative impact sometimes. I want to say there was one play where he got bulldozed, and it like led to like an 80-yard touchdown. And I mean, I could be wrong, but I just remember sitting there being like, man, maybe, I don't know, maybe we look for something else. But this year he's completely completely shut down any doubts that I've had. And not about him specifically, but just about the defense and who's going to surround these stars. And Corbin Hunter is a star in the making. If not, he's a star already. He is overwhelmingly just been an incredible force opposite Matt Salopek or next to Matt Salopek. Because look, you're going to need someone to be that linebacker next to Salopek, and Hunter is that guy.
Yeah, and with these guys leaving, like they need someone to kind of be that anchor on the defense. And I think Hondru could be that guy. I don't know exactly what year in school he is, but I think he's sticking around next year. And I know Salopek's gone, Wise is gone, so you need someone to kind of step in and be that playmaker. So I think he has the potential to do it. Also, I mentioned the pass game a little bit, the secondary. Out of all of the phases, it's probably the weakest, which by no means is saying that it's bad. But I mean, in comparison with the front seven, in comparison with the linebacking core, those are tough. Those are tough units to stack up against. So, out of the three, I'd say the secondary is probably the one that needs the most improvement. But it looked really good against OU. It was a really strong performance, and they had struggled in previous weeks to kind of limit the passing game. It looked really good this week. Rayon Strader, we talked about him a little bit earlier. He could be really good, man. He's got the potential to be a superstar. I think he's, if not the best, if he's one of the best corners in the MAC, if not the best. I wrote it down in the notes, but I'll say it out loud just because it gets me to laugh every time. 70% of the world's covered by water, and Rayon Strader covers the rest. I mean, he is just so good and played like an absolute star on Saturday. I think it's his second career pick. He's going to get a lot more before he leaves Miami. And the fact that he's only a sophomore is crazy. And I wrote it down again, but like, please don't enter the portal. Please stay at because he is so fun to watch with this Red Hawk defense. Please stay at Miami. We love watching you play. So, but yeah, I think he just played like an absolute beast on Saturday.
Yeah, I haven't. We've talked about a couple secondary as players, including Silas Walters and Eli Blakey, and honestly, Strader reminds me a lot of a younger John Sanders Jr. before he moved over to safety. Sanders Jr. now is over, or Saunders, excuse me, John Saunders. He's over at Ole Miss, and he's been a stud for them. He was a stud for Miami, but he started out as kind of your nickel cornerback, and then he moved over to safety. But Strader has been even better than what we could have ever anticipated. He was MAC Freshman of the Year, I want to say, or Defensive Freshman of the Year. I mean, there's a reason his Instagram handle is Lincoln Island. Is don't leave your receiver on an island with this dude because he will lock you down. And you said it. I think we've seen the potential for him to be really, really good, and the hope is that he becomes really, really good while he's at Miami and not somewhere else.
Right. So
yeah, the secondary is getting better with every week, and I think that's huge.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And speaking of John Saunders, the grass isn't always greener when you transfer. Look at his Ole Miss teammate. I don't think Rashad Amos has more than like 10 carries on the season. I'd have to look, but I'm pretty sure he's got less. I think he had 5 last I looked. I don't think Gage has a catch. I don't think Larvadain has a catch for South Carolina. So I'd have to look at the stats again. I'd have to kind of do a deeper dive, but like he's a star here. He's a star here, and he's dominating the MAC, and he's showing off his talents play after play. So I think it's the best system for him. Obviously, I am in no position to make that sort of judgment. I'm just one man in an opinion, but he looks like he could be another really great defensive player that Miami could really utilize in the coming years.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, is there anything else we want to talk about from the OU game? Any other big takeaways we want to touch on before we move on to start talking about Central Mich?
Let's just keep it rolling. Right. This is a 2-game win streak. Hopefully it can continue to keep going. There's no one else on the schedule that really like stands out to me as okay, this is going to be like a really, 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 really tight game. Look, obviously in the MAC, every game is tight. It's the MAC. There's a lot of parity across the MAC, but there's no team that really scares me as saying like, okay, this is a game like we 100% could lose. It's more of like, okay, this game could be a trap game if we're playing really well. But again, I if Miami is playing this well, I don't see any team in the MAC beating them. And the fact that a bunch of MAC teams lost this week when you really weren't expecting them to lose shows that everybody's vulnerable.
Yeah. The MAC, I mean, we say it every week, the MAC is muddy. MAC's a unique conference. Everyone can compete. Everyone can beat one another on any given day, especially right now where we're kind of in the middle of the season. Teams are starting to get fatigued. The wear and tear is starting to be a bigger factor. It's the perfect time for Miami to be hitting their stride, is getting into conference play, getting into these crucial games. Obviously, one more home game. And then it's a pretty long road stretch. I'm pretty sure we got 2 straight weeks on the road.
Nope.
What's that?
It's we face Central at home this week, then it's at Ball State, and then it's versus Kent State versus Northern Illinois at Bowling Green to round out the season.
Oh, wow. That's a lot more home games than I thought.
Yeah, we got three more home games.
Huh. All right. Well, apologies of listeners. I completely botched that, but we got a couple more games at home, and I mean, if we keep making Jaeger a place to dominate and keep making it a fortress, that's a huge factor. Let's talk a little bit about Central Michigan coming up this weekend, coming down to Oxford. 3-4 overall on their season, 1-2 in conference play. I think they had a 1-point win over Ball State and lost to Ohio and Eastern Michigan by a combined 6 points. So every game they've played so far in the MAC has been really close. And I think it's the story in all of their games has been they're in close games. They compete and maybe just sometimes just haven't got the last score to get them over the line.
I think that's going to be a big thing for Miami, is that Miami in their 3 MAC games, none of them have really been particularly close, unless, again, you count Massachusetts as a quasi-MAC school, because they're not really in the MAC right now, but they've been playing a bunch of MAC schools, and they join the MAC next year. But that could be that could be key for Miami, is getting out to a lead early. We saw it happen with Eastern Michigan. We saw it happen with Ohio. And if they can get out to an early lead, then it might be smooth sailing from there. I mean, I know we saw Ohio get into an early lead against Central Michigan, but we just dismantled Ohio. So realistically, like, this should be a game that if we're leading early, it should be wraps, really.
Yeah, and I think a lot of how I expect Saturday to go depends on who gets the ball at quarterback. The QB situation in Central Michigan is really interesting right now. They went with Joe Labas to start the year, transferred him from Iowa. He got a little bit of game action last year in their win over Kentucky, but really struggled this year. He had one of the worst quarterback lines I'd ever seen when I was doing research on him. He had 5 interceptions against FIU. Not exactly a stellar quarterback play from their top guy. He went down with an arm injury. He's done for the year. So they're on QB2, which was Tyler Jefferson, as far as I could tell. And he was more of a runner than a thrower. He's got a 25% completion rate against EMU, but he had 80 yards on the ground. It's kind of the same deal as we talked about. If you take away the effectiveness on the ground and make him throw, that could be a game changer for Miami. The best performance so far out of the 3 quarterbacks has been Burt Emanuel Jr. He went 3 for 4 with 92 yards and a touchdown last week, and also had 60 yards on the ground and a touchdown. That sounds like the guy you give the ball to coming off a pretty good performance last week. I think he gets the ball to start, and I think you kind of do the same thing you did against Parker Navarro. You force him to use one aspect of the game. You take away one of the other. You take away the pass or the run and focus on one aspect of the game and kind of force them to improvise a little bit and get into some uncomfortable situations. And I think that's how you take advantage of this Central Michigan offense right now.
My Central Michigan MAC championship take is aging like old milk. Like, I don't know what I was thinking. I talk about how much I know ball, but this was a swing and a miss here. But yeah, I think you're right. I think Emanuel Jr. is probably the call for the Chippewas, but I don't know. It's a tough situation to be in, because you're in a situation where you need wins. You can't really just be testing out quarterbacks to see. But that's kind of the situation that they're in right now. And I mean, who do they turn to if they decide to choose Emanuel Jr. and he doesn't get the job done. Like that's a very small sample size. 3 for 4, 92 yards, a touchdown. Who knows if it was late in the game when the defense kind of, takes a step back and 63 yards on the ground, and the same deal, like a touchdown. Who knows if the defense took a step back, took a play off or two because it's late in the game. So I think Miami's stability is one of those underrated factors that's going to really help them in this game. And the hope is that, that stability, because at the quarterback position is one of the main factors that helps. And if you're testing out a quarterback and you have to test it against this Miami defense that we've been talking about, it gets an incredible amount of pressure. I mean, that is not a favorable position that I'd want to be in if I were Central Michigan.
Yeah, I do not envy the decisions that the head coach in Central Michigan has to make. I'll also say you're not the only one with bad takes. Don't worry, we've all been there. You can ask Tim about my Paul Skeets take over the winter and ask how that went. So we've all been there. We've all done it. But the run game too is also really interesting for Central Michigan. There's 4 running backs who have like 20 carries each. It's kind of the same situation with Miami, that they have guys who can step up and make an impact, but there's a clear number one here, and it's Marion Lukes, 5.6 yards a carry, 73 yards a game, 4 touchdowns. He's really good about getting through the first line, really good about getting through the defensive tackles and getting to that linebacking core. Obviously, I think Miami's in a unique position where we have some of our playmakers, most of our playmakers are at linebacker, are in that second level. And we also have really good safeties who can come down and run tackle as well. So I think that's the area that Miami might try and expose, is trying to keep him in between the numbers and trying to keep him in the front 7 and trying to limit him from getting outside. It's not game breaking speed. He's not going to like slip through and break off a 40-yarder out of nowhere, but it's good enough speed that if you get one-on-one, it's going to be a challenge to bring him down.
Yeah, I want to go back for a sec just to Bert Emanuel Jr. because I just doing a little reading on him. He's played in 10 games. He's started 7 of them for CMU.
I think he was the starter last season, and then Labas transferred in this season.
Yeah, it says he saw action in 6 games last year. He started 3 games at quarterback. So he obviously has a little bit more experience than what we've said he has. He's played in 10 games and started 4 of them. He was named the MAC's best scrambler in preseason by Lindy's Magazine, which I don't know what Lindy's Magazine is, but he was also named a preseason second team All-MAC pick by College Football Network, which might have been before they named who the quarterback was, but maybe this guy is better than what we think he is. And maybe now that he's back at the helm, he relies on that run game like you were talking about. So I mean, look, I don't know, but I kind of changes things a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think we really touched on just how experienced he is, but it's also the same thing of like Miami's dealt with experienced quarterbacks this season. Parker Navarro is an experienced quarterback. We've also faced one of the best quarterbacks in college football, depends on who you ask, in Riley Leonard, and one of the best offenses in college football in Riley Leonard. This team is not going to be intimidated by a guy who is named an All-MAC second team, with no disrespect to him. But it's nothing they haven't seen before. And like we said, if they've been good at taking away one or both of the aspect of a quarterback's game, whether that's passing or rushing, they've been able to limit their effectiveness in one of those or both in the case of Navarro's effectiveness. So I think it's the same game plan where you go in with the same aggressiveness, try and force them into the air, force them to throw aggressive passes and maybe a turnover or 2. I also think you're absolutely right when you said earlier that Miami has to get the lead early. They said in the last 2 weeks, you get the lead early, you're forcing the team to play from behind, you're forcing them to change up their game plan. If they do that early and force Central Michigan to be a little more aggressive than maybe they want to be, that screams like another big turnover week for us.
Yeah, playing from behind is a lot harder than playing ahead. We've seen it in the games that Miami's lost when they've been playing from behind. They have to be out of rhythm, they have to be out of system, and Miami is most effective when they're in their system. And I think that's something that maybe needs to get looked at a little bit more in the next coming seasons. It's just like, how do we play out of system?
Hmm.
But I think right now, if they can continue to just get the lead early, whether it's 3 points or whether it's 7 points or whether it's 16, like we saw against OU, Miami's going to be in a much more favorable position this week.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. But yeah, I do think that this run game is going to be a huge factor because I talked a little bit about Marion Lukes. I also want to talk about BJ Harris real quick. Transferred in from Missouri, had a monster game against Ball State. 8 for 151 yards,
Whew.
8 rush attempts, 2 touchdowns. Yeesh. That's video game numbers. That's numbers you put up on Madden right there. So I think that obviously Burt Emanuel depends on who gets the ball. I haven't seen a depth chart yet, but taking away the QB, taking away the pass game should be a point of emphasis. You have to be careful in the run game though, because you cannot get burnt on the ground. And from looking at the numbers, it looks like CMU has the guys who can burn you on the ground. So I think trying to keep these guys in between the numbers, keeping them in front of you, is going to be a huge point of emphasis for this team.
Yeah, we talked early in the season that Miami's run defense hasn't been as strong as we would have liked it, but I think they have steadily improved over the course of this season, and they look much better. And I think this is probably going to be one of their bigger tests in terms of the run game in the MAC, as you mentioned. They have 2 guys that can gash them for big yards, and I just said it, but I think this is probably going to be one of the bigger tests for Miami in the MAC when it comes to the run defense. But who knows? This defense has been on fire lately. They have been playing as one unit, and when their defense is clicking, man, it is fun to watch, but it is hard to get through if you're the opposing team.
Yeah, I think this week for Miami, it should be really about emphasizing that run defense. Looking at the wide receiver room, there's nothing that really scares me jumping off the page. Obviously, I haven't done a ton of film study on CMU, so I can't say for sure. But based on the numbers, I think most of their guys are in like the 200 receiving range, a couple of touchdowns spattered in there. Doesn't really scare me. What scares me is this rushing attack. The 2-headed monster, that's BJ Harris and Marion Lukes. If these guys get rolling and get Miami moving backwards, that's a really tough momentum train to stop. Obviously, we've seen them be able to do it, especially in the last couple of weeks. They've really limited rushing attack, but these are 2 guys that can burn you. There's 2 guys that have burnt other teams in the MAC. So I think we have to be very careful and respect that if these guys get into open space, we have to bring them down. We have to there's no breaking tackles here. There's no soft tackles here. You bring them down, keep them in front of you. That should be the point of emphasis for the coaching staff this week, in my opinion.
Yeah, and if you even want to include Burt Emanuel Jr., if he is going to be the starter, he does have the ability to scramble. So having to contain 2 running backs plus the quarterback, this is going to be a real test for that Miami defense.
Well, speaking of defense, before we move on to our final segment, I want to touch briefly on Central Michigan's defense. And they're kind of like Miami. They get a lot of pressure up front, and they use that to create turnovers. I want to highlight Dakota Cochran. He's got 7 TFLs on the season. That's big numbers. He got 3.5 sacks. He forced a fumble. We talk about it all the time with limiting Ugu and limiting Wise. I think Miami has to take a page out of that book and try and limit Dakota Cochran coming in off the edge, especially with, I don't know, I didn't see, I think Colby Borders is back now, but with a fully healthy O-line that's been here for years now, you really need to make a point of emphasis. Like, we need to protect the quarterback. We need to keep the pocket clean. We need to open up these rushing lanes. And if Central Michigan's able to get consistent pressure, I think that puts Miami on the back foot.
Yeah, I wonder how they're going to stop Dakota Cochran. Maybe it's throwing 2 offensive linemen on him. Maybe it's throwing the running back on a joint block with one of the tackles. But it'll be interesting to see, because we've seen that when Brett gets a little uncomfortable in the pocket, he's a little more jumpy. He's a little more prone to making some of those mistakes. But I don't know, the way that the offensive line played last week and the way that they have been playing overall in the last 2-3 weeks, they've been really good, and they've been really solid, and the confidence is there. And confidence is a really, really big momentum builder, and it carries through multiple weeks. And I mean, we talk about it in our grad classes, like confidence is key. So if I don't want to say that that's the only thing that the offensive line needs this week, because obviously it's not. They need to play penalty free football again. But if the confidence is high, I think that's going to help the team like in an immeasurable way.
Yeah, I think you're right. I also think that like even if you do double block, even if you do double team, even if you do keep the running back on in the blocking, that stops one guy. Jason Williams also has 3.5 sacks this season. Jordan Kwiatkowski has 9 TFLs. It's the same problem we have talking about Miami's defense, Miami's defense. You take away one guy, okay, well, someone else is unblocked. And in this case, we have 3 guys who can make an impact in that front 7, and that's an area where Miami you can kind of say has struggled when they've faced these elite defenses and these guys who can get pressure, and these teams are able to rush the quarterback. And we saw what happened earlier in the season when Brett gets rushed. Like, he is prone to making some iffy throws and kind of improvising a little bit and maybe making throws he wouldn't make in a clean pocket. So I think that the O-line is key in every game, but especially in this game with a front 7 like CMU's, it is going to be crucial to get that offensive line confident and performing early.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. It's going to be really tough. It's going to be, I want to say it projects to be a defensive battle, but for all we know, the offense is going to just light it up.
Yeah.
But it could be a very gritty game that in the beginning of the season we predicted it to be. We predicted a lot of these MAC games to not be high scoring or blowouts. Like, we predicted to be these gritty, ugly kind of defensive minded games, and I think that's exactly what we're going to see here this weekend.
Yeah, well, let's get into predictions. I think you went 1 last week prediction wise. I think you were closer than me.
What did I guess?
I think you went 30-17, which was about spot on.
There was no way I guessed 30-17.
I know. I guess I went 24-22 because I had the extra point thrown on there. But I'm pretty sure you said 30. But hey, either way,
we'll have to look back at the logs for that one.
We'll go back to tape. We'll go back to the replay room on that one. We'll throw the challenge flag out there. But Ted, any predictions for the game this week?
Oh, let's see. I made this prediction. I think I made it for the Toledo or Eastern Michigan game, but I'm going to go back to it. 15-10 Miami. Just a gritty, ugly football game. I think Miami's going to score, and then they're either going to miss a extra point or go for 2, and that's no shot at Dom Jobin. I just have an inkling, and then it's going to be 6-0, and then Miami just kicks field goals from there on out.
All right, 15-10. I was gonna ask if we get a touchdown, or is that just 5 straight field goals? So thank you for clarifying. I'm gonna go back to the old. I'm gonna stick with what I know. I'm gonna go 21-17. I was between 16 or 17, but I think you're right. It's one of those where it's going to be ugly. It's going to be defensive, and whoever gets the big play is going to win that ball game. And I think Miami just has more
100%
play than Central Michigan. So
100%.
21-17. I think it's 3 touchdowns. That's kind of the vibe I've been getting from this team lately. And I think it's a defensive battle. I think it's one of those where it's 21-9 late on, and then last couple minutes, CMU gets a touchdown, kind of similar to the OU game. So, well, those are predictions. We'll be back next week. I'll do a better job at remembering who said what, so we can come back next week. To finish off this week, we have a new segment we want to do just to kind of honor Chuck Martin and kind of celebrate his 59 wins and now as Miami's head coach. We've spent some time trying to narrow down the top 5 Chuck Martin wins at Miami. I think we have a pretty good list. I will also say that we're biased. Most of these happened when we were here. So we were there to see them. So that impact had made us kind of pick it a little bit more. Obviously there might be some we're missing, but these are the 5 that we came up with. So I'll start off. I'm going to go with the MAC championship over Toledo last year. I think it's one of Chuck Martin's best wins. That game was ugly. It was gritty. It was a typical Chuck Martin Miami win where the run game was huge. The defense came up big. And it was one of those where you didn't really know which way it was going to go until the last kick of the game or the last play of the game. So I was there. I went up to Detroit for it. I had a blast. It was a really great environment at Ford Field. Also just a really awesome setting for a conference championship. So stellar defense performance. Just obviously, anytime you win a MAC title is a huge achievement. So I'm going to go with that as my top answer. Also want to shout out, that was Avion Smith's last game as a Red Hawk. Shout out Avion Smith for bringing home a MAC championship. But yeah, Ted, any thoughts or want to follow up?
Yeah, I also got to attend that game live. Me and a couple of buddies drove up to Detroit. A very long day, little 4-hour drive in the morning, 4-hour game, 4-hour drive back, little 12-hour day. Never killed no one. But yeah, it was one of those. It was one of those games where it was just absolutely electric. Being in Ford Field, where basically the two main seating areas are completely filled up. It doesn't get much better than that. And Avion Smith played an incredible game, and he transferred down to Alabama A&M to be able to start, which he 100% deserves to start. There's not a world that he should be sitting behind another quarterback. So it was great. And then I'll move on to our next one on the list is the Cincinnati upset at Nippert just last year. I mean, we don't get to see that ever. I mean, they were on a 21 or 7. It was like a 17 or 18 game win streak. We hadn't won since 2005. That was the last time Miami won the bell, and the fact that we got to witness that was incredible. I remember being in a house with a bunch of my buddies, and we all rushed down to the living room after the blocked kick. I remember calling the blocked kick, and then we watched overtime and we saw the interception, and we all just started singing, singing the song, right?
Yeah.
The Love and Honor to Miami. So it was just super cool. And then being able to see all the guys bring the bell uptown and celebrate and brick, obviously that's wicked.
It was super cool. I kind of had a similar experience. We were watching one of my good friends' sister goes to UC. So a little bit of family rivalry there. That phone call after the game was hilarious to watch in person. But obviously, we all watched the game. We're before the field goal, we're like, all right, well, the game's over. We put up a good fight. Cool. Block. Like, oh, wait, whoa. Are we in this? Is this actually happening? The game ends, and we're all instantly like, well, now we have to go out. Now we have to go celebrate. We were all planning on staying in. We're like, all right, we'll just watch the game and go to bed after. We're like, well, now we have to. This is the biggest win, arguably in Miami's history, at least recent history. So that was an awesome experience. Very rarely you get to see a team like Miami beat UC. I think that was a year or two after they'd gone to the playoff too. So that was a big time program too.
Yeah,
experience here was really, really cool.
Yeah, you said it's in our notes, but it was UC's first season in the Big 12, and I was going through Chuck Martin's tenure here. I don't think he had a win against a Power 5 school up until that point. I could be wrong.
I think he had Northwestern the year before too.
Oh, that's right. Okay, this is gonna sound like a diss, but I kind of forget that Northwestern is a Power 5 school.
That's a very fair statement. I think they do too.
But let's just say it's the most memorable win against a Power 5 school.
Absolutely, I'll go with that. Yeah. We'll go to number 3 on the list. We've got the MAC championship against CMU. I think that was 2019. This game was just a who's who of oh my God, I forgot we had him on our team from a couple of years ago. It was the first year I started covering sports. Jack Sorensen was our slot receiver. He had 8 catches for 123 and a touchdown. Jalen Bester was our running back, 20 carries, 66 yards and a touchdown. And Brett Gabbert was still the quarterback. I think that was his freshman year. So he's been here since 2019, but he's still killing it. Maybe he goes for number 3 this year. Who knows?
Oh man, that would be special for him.
That'd be really cool. Yeah, I mean, we were obviously not in Miami. I don't remember much about that game. I think I only really heard about it the next year. But obviously, that was the Miami's first conference title in probably close to 10, 15 years. So huge moment for Coach Martin, huge moment for the program to kind of get them back on the national scene. So I think that had to be in the top 5. Obviously not the most memorable win, doesn't really stack up with the UC win, but anytime you get a conference title to a team, especially after missing out for so many years, I think it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll keep moving on as we're getting a little short on time here, but I have it as we put it as number 5 on the list. I honestly want to move it higher to number 4. That's why I'm talking about it. But the Frisco Football Classic Bowl win, It was Chuck Martin's first bowl win as a head coach at Miami University. He was 0-3 coming in the matchup. He's 1-4 now. We lost a tough one, the Avocado Kir Bowl last year, but I mean, you can't even call that a bowl. That was disgusting.
I don't consider that was a wash. That was a Hurricane Bowl.
Exactly. It was literally in the middle of a hurricane. But Brett Gabbert, he was there, of course. He's always here. 230 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was named co-MVP. Kenny Tracy, 92 yards and a touchdown. Kevin Davis had 24 receiving yards out of the backfield and 1 receiving touchdown. Jacquez Warren, who is a guy that they sorely miss. He was also named co-MVP. I think he had like 4 tackles, all solos. And John Saunders Jr. They both had 1 interception each. That was a down year for Miami. People were kind of like, oh, I expect a little bit more out of them, but to be able to just get any type of bowl win is huge, especially for Chuck Martin. Like, this is a guy that, like, you want to see in bowl games. You want to see winning these big games. So obviously the track record doesn't line up with how good of a coach he is, but hopefully there will be more wins to come. I mean, Miami, they need at least 3 more wins to qualify for a bowl game this year. So, hopefully they're able to qualify for sure.
Yeah, I mean, obviously 1-4 is not a great record, but I mean, watching some of those games, it's been a lot closer than we're giving credit for. Like, we've been in some battles over the years when it comes to bowl games. I mean, even we talked about it last year with the Hurricane. I think it was still like 12-9.
Yeah.
And then losing to, was it North Texas? We lost to a couple of years ago. In the Bahamas Bowl.
I know we beat North Texas.
Who did we play in the Bahamas Bowl? Because that was the one I remember that we lost.
Let me look that up real quick. Well, if you want to talk about
it's kind of hard to talk about Coach Martin's wins without going back to number 1. So we'll end off with talking about Coach Martin's first win with the Red Hawks, and that was in 2014 against the UMass Minutemen, which was an absolutely thrilling game. Oh my gosh, I was looking at the box score, 42-41 win at home. Don't see many of those anymore. Andrew Hendricks, who, to be honest, I had never heard of before coming into this game, had a crazy stat line. 4 touchdowns and 437 yards. Also had 13 carries and 91 yards and a touchdown on the ground, too. 5 touchdowns. Pretty much the entire performance came from Andrew Hendricks, who that's one of the craziest QB stat lines I've seen from Miami ever, much less in Coach Martin's tenure.
You're telling me Brett Gabbert wasn't the quarterback in 2014?
I guess not. I would
Andrew Hendricks, just looking him up really quickly, he was a guy that followed Chuck Martin from Notre Dame. He three-year player at Notre Dame. Didn't do a whole lot in his time at Notre Dame, really just playing sparsely, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, and just getting thrown in at garbage time. But yeah, he came over to Miami and played pretty well. 23 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. To answer your question earlier, we lost to UAB in the Bahamas Bowl. It was Trent Dilfer's I think it was his 2nd or 3rd game ever at UAB before he absolutely ran that program into the ground. I really hope UAB gets rid of him because they had such promise, especially after winning the Bahamas Bowl. But yeah, Andrew Hendricks, you said it. I mean, 4 touchdowns, 437 yards, 91 yards on 13 carries and a touchdown. I mean, that's nuts.
Yeah, that's as good as you can ask for. Well, we are way over our time limit here. We have fully gone over our time, so we'll call it there. Ted, thank you again for joining me this week. We got a big week ahead. Any final thoughts before we head over to the CMU game?
Obviously, would love a win for Chuck Martin. So, hoping for the win for Chuck Martin. Little less sweet that it's not at home, so you can't celebrate at home. But who cares? Once he gets back to Oxford, he'll be able to celebrate. So, just hoping for a record-breaking win.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we will call it there. Thank you all for watching episode 7 of Red Brick Recap. We will see you next week at the same bad time on the same bad channel. Have a good week and go Red Hawks.
Go Red Hawks.